Hello, and welcome to this Rain Taxi virtual event featuring Rikki Ducornet. I'm Eric Lorberer. I'm the director of Rain Taxi. If you don't know about us, we are a nonprofit organization that champions aesthetically adventurous literature. Our work revolves around a quarterly magazine of critical writing. This is our spring issue that I'm holding, and if you would like to hold it too, we would love to mail you a copy. Please check out our website anytime after tonight's event to see if you might be interested, or if you want to become a Rain Taxi member and get all our issues sent straight to your door. Another way we advocate for literature is through events like this one. Most of them, like tonight, are free to attend, but if you're able to pitch in a little something, please use the donate button at the bottom of your screen. Rain Taxi is privileged to receive funding from the National Endowment for the Arts and the Minnesota State Arts Board, among other places, but our most vital supporters are individual readers like you. There are lots of other ways you can participate tonight. There's the chat happening, and that is great to see all of you chiming in from so many places. There's also the Ask a Question box. Feel free to put a question in there for Rikki if one occurs to you as our conversation goes on. We'll try to get to those toward the end. And of course, you can buy the book using that button on your screen. Tonight, if you use that, you'll be taken right to the ordering page for Trafik at our partner bookseller Majors and Quinn here in Minneapolis. And if there are other books on your wish list, you don't have to stop there. Poke around Majors and Quinn's site. Anything you buy tonight using that link helps support our series. It's now my great pleasure to welcome Rikki Ducornet. She is such a special author to Rain Taxi. She is the sole interviewee in issue number 1 of Rain Taxi, which came out 25 and a half years ago, 26 and a half years ago, I guess now. Our founders, Carolyn Keebler and Randall Heath, used to only half-jokingly say that they created Rain Taxi so they would have an excuse to go talk to Rikki Ducornet. I couldn't agree more, and it's been a conversation we've been privileged to continue over the decades, and we'll continue it a little bit for you tonight as well. Rikki, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so happy. I'm so delighted. It's always so good to see you.
Indeed, likewise.
Yeah.
Well, this is a gem, and so I'm so happy to get to talk to you about it, with you about it tonight. And I want to start right off by, I think a lot of people have heard already that this is a work of science fiction. And in a sense, it's your first book of science fiction. In another sense, it's quintessential, not Rikki Ducornet. So it sort of feels simultaneously brand new and not different and not different. Is that how it feels to you? Were you dipping your toe into new waters here?
Yeah, it did feel new. I mean, I have a couple of short science fiction stories, really tiny little fictions. So that's happened even right at the very beginning. So it's always been there in some way, but yeah, this did feel different. And I've always been very interested in science, and I was doing a lot of research just for the pleasure of it into AI and GAI and just all the recent work that's been happening, and really interested in the space program and NASA, and follow that really closely. So I guess it was inevitable. It's been percolating for a long time, and then there it pounced.
Well, part of what I love about it is how it's sometimes a writer moves toward a genre, and then at other times, I'm thinking about someone like Harry Matthews. It's almost as if they lasso a genre and bring it toward them. And that's what I feel you did here. It's sort of less like you went there and more like you brought the whole space opera toward your universe.
Interesting you mentioned Harry, because I loved him, and I still love him. I really miss him, and I love the work. but also really intrigued by Oulipo, Working Place for Potential Literature, which he was, I think, a founding member of. And I know for a long time the only American member, but that was so much, Oulipo was so much about finding ways to kind of force the imagination into unexpected places. You know, it was all about novelty. And I've always worked that way. So I felt a real kinship with Oulipo when I discovered it, and real kinship with Harry and his work. And the other thing that I really appreciated about him was that although Oulipo proposes all sorts of exercises to follow, he once said, nonetheless, you know, it's not a church. You know, if my imagination isn't being stimulated, you know, by this particular exercise, well, and I just don't pay attention to, you know, I just drop it. Whole point, you know, stimulate the imagination and not hinder it. I love that.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. Fearless experimentation means maybe knowing when to back off too. But I want to stick with science fiction for a second. One thing reading your book made me remember was Colin Wilson had a wonderful essay, probably in the 60s, in which he described science fiction as existentialism, as a kind of wave of existentialism, or a way to sort of dramatize those sort of 20th century concepts. And I was thinking about that as I read this, and I wonder if you would read for us the short chapter called On Being, because I think it's sort of the perfect illustration of that.
Oh, that's so, okay. Yes, right on. Yeah, because that, yeah, you're so right. I mean, that is so much about existential compromise, the book, and that took me by surprise. So, okay, I'll do that. Okay, hold on Being. So I should just explain where I'm coming from, and that is that Mick, it probably should be Mike, but I always thought of him as Mick, who's the robot, and Quiver, who's the astronaut as he's traveling with, are both together moving at warp speed through the galaxies in something called the Wobble. And they adore one another, but they fight all the time. And they both are existentially compromised. And so the fighting often is about just that. Okay, so, and first cycle is the first part of the day, On Being. The following first cycle, Mick confronts Quiver as soon as she unfolds from her hammock, and even before she hits the floor. I am a self, Mick, beyond excited, levitates from within a diaphanous halo of steam. Yes, yes, I know, Mick, not so fast, Mick cries, his voice rising as he orbits the breakfast table, a trail of mist behind him. You see, I have been mulling over this in the dark, an interminable darkness so dark, even the space eye was empty of light. Okay, I get it, Anne. Here it is, Mick cries. Are you listening, Quiv? I am. I am a self because I think. Yes, I get it. Quiet, Quiv. There is more, so much more. If I am because I think, this means I am thought. Wow, baby, I guess so. Quiver. This means that I am not a gizmo. Satisfied, he rolls off, eager to consider the current cycle's itinerary. Thoughtful, Quiver nibbles her crick. I have been soul blind, she thinks, overwhelmed with self-loathing.
Wonderful.
That was a very short.
Yes, well, they're you know, I want to talk about the length because they're short, but they're miraculously ample at the same time. We'll get to that, but for now, let's talk about Quiver and Mick. I might say Mike because can I tell the audience that Mike is an AI, but the name is short for Michelangelo, which I just think is a wonderful collision of the future and the past in that name. But what a great introduction to these two creatures who are experiencing they're defining themselves, and or looking to define themselves. Quiver, human, mostly human anyway, sort of looking for that, and Mike or Mick, an artificial intelligence, but who has this passion for the old Earth, and but is also constantly trying to uncover themselves. So it's extraordinary. Where did that idea of that AI that would be so embedded in the past come from?
So I began with this idea that it would be really interesting to examine what an experience of the self and time and space would be if Earth had vanished. What would that look like? How would it be to exist in such a vacuum in space and time without the Earth? You know, what could I do with that? And so I got Mick, and he says Michelangelo, but there's a microphone on his rear end, so I don't know. But you know, what happened right away was realizing that's impossible. It's impossible to exist within a vacuum, and it's impossible to be an Earthling, whether a GAI robot or something of a person. I mean, very much a person if harmed, but persons are usually harmed one way or another. Anyway, I realized that they could not be in any way without references to the world. And so suddenly Mick was supplied with what I call a swift wheel, which is this, I'm not sure what it would look like, but a kind of gizmo that would contain all this information about planet Earth, enormous amount of information. And he's crazy about cinema. He's particularly interested in Al Pacino, is a real crush, but he's got all this stuff in there. And so that's the way he shares all this information with her. And he's a very rich creature. You know, he's a self-conscious AI. And then Quiver is not only receiving this information from him, she's had a certain experience of the moon and vestiges of what Earth was like. But her knowledge of Earth comes from what she calls the lights, which is a place where she runs in artificial reality and where she also falls in love with a virtual being. So my absurd notion, you know, that stimulated this in part, you know, to imagine a universe without the world proved itself to be an impossibility within 2 minutes. You know?
Right.
And then, of course, the Earth kept intruding. And once I got into the swift wheel business and was looking up stuff online, like Al Pacino's kitchen, because Mick was so in love with Al Pacino's plumbing, you know, I discovered all this stuff, you know, that's there. And I started tumbling into pop music and cinema and just all kinds of things.
Absolutely.
It was so much fun. It's like rediscovering my own planet from a distance.
Oh, that's so greatly put. Yeah, and the sheer amount of pop culture in here, especially for such a compact work, is staggering, and I felt was another sort of new side for you. Not brand new, but like, wow, you're you know, here's a world in which all of that can come out, and it makes so much sense that an AI would have access to all of the you know, everything that we all have access to online, and could potentially fall in love with Al Pacino and his plumbing. Yeah. So, what about Trafik itself? Quiver and Mick are en route to well, maybe we should actually read when they decide to go rogue. It's another short bit that I think really sets some of this up. If you're willing, yeah.
Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, and that I have to say too. I was traveling a lot when I was writing this book, and I was in airplanes a lot and trains. This was before COVID, of course. So about 3 years ago, one summer, and at the end of my journey, I was in Finland, and before coming home, I had gone to Prague, and then I was in Paris, and then the Loire Valley, where I'd lived for 18 years, and then went to see a friend in Finland. And I was waiting for him in a bar at an hour, and there was this amazing music, electronic music playing. It was really astounding, and it was very cosmical, and I suddenly felt like writing. And so I asked the young lady behind the bar, she had a pen or a pencil or something and some paper, and she did. She was all prepared for me. I was so grateful. And I wrote for that hour, and I wrote 10 pages that really just triggered the book in a profound way. I really knew I had a book. And then I raised my eyes and I looked out the window, and there was a sign, Trafik, Trafik. And I knew that was the title, but I didn't know what it was yet. And it was at this point when I was writing that I realized, okay, where is that? Okay, 24?
24, yeah.
Okay, going rogue. So, I mean, it took me by surprise. So they've been involved in bringing back precious and semi-precious metals from space, and they've gotten into real trouble because they've messed up. And their boss is named Alpha Astron. The moment is momentous. They will have to report back to elsewhere, admit their phenomenal negligence, suffer raised eyebrows, stagnate in limbo as Alpha Astron decides their next, and it will be dangerous and humiliating assignment. That is, Quiver whispers, unless we go rogue. They are standing inside the kombucha cooler with the door closed. The cooler is calming. I've never acquired a taste for kombucha, says Quiver, yet here we are. They feel the wobble slowly rolling in place, listen to the familiar sound of kombucha sloshing in its vat. I've often wondered what was making that noise, says Quiver. I feared it was happening in my mind. If we go rogue, says Mick, let's go to Trafik. Trafik, Quiver approves. They abandon the cooler and, standing beneath a space eye, gaze up at the swarming stars. The attention of the cosmos is focused upon us, she says. Their blinking is the way they signal to one another and to us. Disencumbered of all expectations and restraints, the sequencer flashes azure, a black hole claims its center, and Bugs Bunny appears wearing a top hat. He says, what's up, Doc? Trafik, says Mick. Trafik, says Bugs, coming right up. What was that? Quiver asks, dumbfounded. Hollywood, says Mick, an avatar of yore.
Wonderful. And I'll confess now, I was dying to hear that, partially to hear your Bugs Bunny impression. But a great example of how pop culture continually appears in the book. And I love that Mick says an avatar, because it, when I read your work, Rikki, sometimes every word seems, it's like, oh, this word that we all now use, and we're reminded like of its other meanings, and it's sort of more prismatic. And I just sort of felt like, yeah, we're in the age in which our avatars, they're no longer miraculous in the way that they could be. But yeah, back to Bugs Bunny was why for you? Why is all this pop culture so bubbling up so much? Yeah.
You know, I have a wonderful son, Jean-Yves, who's a writer and producer, arranger of music, and he works in the pop world in Los Angeles. Grammy winner. Really proud of him. It's really hard to break into that world in LA. But because of him, I became really, I mean, I've always loved pop music as a young woman, but I became, you know, really interested in the scene and the world in which he was living, and kind of fascinated by it. And so as I was writing the book, I realized that people like Nicki Minaj inevitably would show up. You know, that song Spaceships is I think one of the funniest things I've ever seen. And there was a period in time where I felt if everybody woke up in the morning and listened to and watched Nicki Minaj sing Spaceships, they would never be blue. You know, I mean, it's just so tremendously funny. So I don't know, you know, it's been a part of my life and more, just simply because of my relationship with my son and wanting to be aware of what's going on around him.
Neat. Yeah, it was really interesting to me that Mick has this fascination, and partly bolstered by the endless accessibility of all the pop cultural detritus of Earth that is no more in this world, but that all still exists. And Quiver is more interested in reading, and we have to talk about Julio Cortázar, since that is what she's reading. So that kind of tension, but not only sort of between like, oh, what in this post-Earth world, what will be the place of the literature that we all love so much? But yes, Cortázar, why is he in here? No.
So it turns out, this wonderful book, and I've got it here, which is from the Observatory, which is out of print at the moment. And I keep nagging the wonderful publisher to bring it back. Archipelago. It's a gorgeous book. But it was one of the things that triggered Trafik. And just an opening phrase in the book kind of haunted me. And I didn't realize that the book would in fact become a central character within my book, you know, that it would reappear. So in fact, it's the only book that remains. All books are gone within the cosmos. And the only remaining book is from the Observatory by Julio Cortázar, because Quiver's lover managed to hold on to a copy and hide it. That's because there's a period where books are no longer allowed. And she managed, before she is taken away and made to vanish, managed to get it to Quiver. So Quiver knows that it's precious somehow. But in fact, she really isn't a reader. You know, no one is.
Right.
But she does have this book. Yeah, so this is the one book that she can read. And I didn't realize how that was going to also direct the book and take us in its way to Trafik. And there are things that happen to Trafik that I didn't expect, but that happened all because of this book. For example, I don't know, I'm giving things away, but suddenly a Carnegie Library shows up in another galaxy entirely. And I didn't expect that to happen, but it was inevitable because I needed a library. You know, I needed that to happen. But it was all about intuition and synchronicity and kind of following where the book was taking me.
Yeah.
But it's a beautiful book. It's a crazy book.
Yeah. Well, and so many of your books have had a touchstone figure, Lewis Carroll, Angela Carter, you know, and it is for me, it's one of the great pleasures of literature to hear those voices animate new voices, you know, and uh, it's just wonderful. I You have so many memorable phrases in this book, but I think when Quiver is reading him, she says, "Who Cortázar, who before he died had the face of a lion," and I love that this future person would that would be their their doorway into that into his wonderful world, you know.
It's so interesting because he actually did. I've forgotten the name of the disease, but he was ill
Oh
and
yeah,
features changed. Yeah.
yeah. Again, it's like you say it so nonchalantly, but it is a miraculous sort of transformation, really. Yeah. Um, you had mentioned in the reading the character uh, Alpha Astron, and Quiver decides that he's an archon, which again is such a a, a, a wonderful Rikki Ducornet moment, because your readers know that you often bring in ideas from Gnosticism uh, and this their sort of long embedded ideas from the past. But this one I found particularly interesting because the they're by going rogue, they're essentially leaving behind work. And yeah, I'm not. I guess I just thought, is there, you know, there's a sort of political fable happening here that seems to parallel some of your interests in Gnosticism. So I wonder if you'd maybe talk about that.
Oh, it's so funny because Alpha Astron, their boss, yeah, is an archon. You know, there's someone of enormous power and capacities, and to do mischief. And I was actually, when I was thinking of Alpha Astron, it was a period of Paul Manafort, you know, being so much in the news. And so there's a closet that's described in Trafik, which is actually my version, sort of cosmical version of his closet. You know, the guy that had, I don't know if anybody even remembers who Paul Manafort is anymore, you know? He was the guy with the ostrich skin jacket or something. I think we all realized that it was not ostrich plumes, but the ostrich skin jacket. Anyway, he's got, his closet is so large that I think it takes over a big chunk of space, and it has its own moon, so he can find his socks when he goes looking for them. So yeah, so there was this political thing too, and there was a moment at the beginning when I was writing it, when Quiver would swear, she'd say, "Oh, forking MAGA." And I took that out because so quickly that just took over our culture. And what seemed a sort of, you know, amusing idea initially very quickly faded. And
Right.
I found other ways for her to curse.
Yeah, and again, it's amazing to think of all of this eternal return, in a way, all of this happening in the future, and yet it never truly vanishes. By the way, do you think you'll return to this world at all, as so often happens in science fiction? There, you know, I think the science fiction readers call it world building, in which you know, you could there's a whole universe here now that that you've invented terms for, and that we understand, and that has a history in which catastrophic things have happened, and Earth is no more.
You know what happened, you know, the way I work, I mean, I'm really seized by the scruff of the neck each time. You know, something pounces that's absolutely irresistible, and often will pounce at 3 a.m. or at 6 a.m, and I'll get up and start writing. And what happened after Trafik was something else pounced, and it's called The Plotinus, and it is a sci-fi, and it's also very much an existential sci-fi. And Coffee House is going to bring it out, I think, in a year or so.
Oh, wonderful.
But that one, The Plotinus, I mean, it's its own animal too. But I thought that one perhaps had the possibility of a continuation, because there's one character who we barely see, but who I think has a lot of potential. But the thing is, if she doesn't pounce, at 3 or 6 in the morning, it won't happen, because I really cannot, it simply does not interest me to plan ahead of time.
Yes.
I love this spontaneous incandescence or whatever it is that's irresistible. That happens. It just seems to be the way I work. I mean, and I think that's why I've always felt very close to surrealism, that I really count on novelty and synchronicity and dreams to direct me and to kind of release the energy.
Do you, by the way, and fear not, we're going to talk about surrealism a lot, but do you ever use chance methods
Yes.
when you write? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And then that way I find Lippo also really very interesting. But yeah, I mean, I love to walk into a library and be intrigued by a binding and see what happens when I take that out and just open it up. And it's fascinating how often you'll find yourself in a kind of conversation that you did not expect, but that is absolutely essential to what's happening. Synchronicity is fascinating. It's a real thing. Yeah. And it's a real mystery, but it is there. It functions somehow. And I don't know if this has to do with quantum physics, that the interconnectedness of everything in some way. Does it actually turn up like that in libraries? Part of a book, is it functioning for us somehow? It's no idea, but I count on it.
To stick with the craft a little bit, so earlier I said I wanted to talk about the length, because on the one hand, this is one of your shortest novels, and on the other hand, I think I said it feels so epic to me. So it's sort of exactly the right size, but I'm not sure what size it is. Is it small? Is it giant? And that's something I love about it. And it made me think about other similar tensions in your work. For example, your sentences and diction and syntax is also formally elegant, which is usually the hallmark of a lot of labor. And on the other hand, the spirit of it is wildness and abandon and unfettered imagination. And these things seem to so many like hard to corral into one container. So take us a little bit into your craft world. How are you getting both ends of the spectrum in there?
Well, for one thing, the book is written in warp drive. And so I knew right away it was going to, it would be something you'd read in an hour and a quarter or something, that right. It would begin and whang, you're there, you're on Trafik. Right. I kind of knew from the beginning, this is written in warp drive. And I was thinking of animation. I was thinking kind of an animated cartoon, but
Bugs Bunny. Yeah.
Bugs Bunny, yeah. But also, writing for me often is a lot, and I realized that recently. It's a lot like improv theater, and that's something that I studied briefly, and I loved the theater. And I was a kid who grew up on a college campus, Bard College, and at a time it was very tribal, and it was a small community and really tight. And there was a great theater department, and they'd need kids, and And I loved it. I had so much fun. You know, I was sort of a trooper as a little kid, you know, so I could be counted on not to mess up too much on stage. But theater did intrigue me. It was something I thought about seriously later on. But I've always been interested in improv theater. And I recently realized that writing is so much like improv theater for me, because characters appear, you know, Mick appears and Quiver appears, and they have voices, you know, they're ready-made and they're ready to go and they're talking their heads off. And I've just got to run after, you know, and interact with them. I mean, like when I was writing The Filmmakers Inquisition, I read all of Marquis de Sade. I read all of his books again, which was terrifying. I read all his letters until I had his voice, and he just sort of showed up. And I remember walking around, stuffed a pillow, you know, in my clothes to feel like Sade in prison, getting fatter and fatter and angrier and angrier. And it was improv theater, you know, as the writing was just coming in that way. But it came after a lot of reading and a lot of thinking. But often things will pounce. Like when Mick and Quiver pounce, I read a lot in science, and I subscribe to Nature and Science. There's a lot I don't understand, but I love the vocabulary. And so the incomprehensible for a non-science scientist vocabulary fed in too, you know, in certain rhythms of language. So it was very playful. I was having a lot of fun with it. And it's so much about music. So improv, I'd say, and a kind of a real attentiveness to sound. And in that way, I think Lewis Carroll was my master. You know, I've read Alice in Wonderland 1,000 times. The rhythms in Carroll, I know, show up in my own work. But that's a big part of it. And I loved when my son was growing up, you know, he'd come into the kitchen, you know, and I'd be baking something or something, and he'd say, listen, you know, like I've got this thread, you know, I've got this beginning here. And then he'd go off, and then he'd come back at the end of the day and he'd have a song. And I realized it's so much like writing when I'm working on a novel or short story. You know, there'll be a phrase or paragraph, you know, something is happening. And a few hours later, you know, you've got a page, maybe you've got a chapter, you know, maybe you've got the beginning of a book. And it's a similar process. It's very organic and deeply intuitive. And yeah, it's so much about music. You know, Robert Coover, last time I saw him, that was in Paris, and he was speaking with Harry at the end of a conversation, public conversation, and Harry had given this great reading, and Coover stood up and said, Harry, it's like singing, isn't it? Harry said, yeah, Bob, it's like singing. Loved that moment.
Wonderful. Yeah. The embodiment of it. Rikki, thank you for that. I feel like you just took us all into some kind of memory palace and kept opening doors, and what a wonderful description of that. I want to ask you to read one more passage, just a paragraph, because I think it actually illustrates how everything you just talked about ends up being a paragraph in a novel. The one I was thinking of was the one that begins on page 76.
Okay, they're on Trafik. Swallowed up by Trafik's shimmering abundance, Mick, now unrecognizable in a velours bournoose. They all get all dressed up. They're scholars, university people from all over the galaxies who come to Trafik to party, and they're all dressed up. So, swallowed up by Trafik's shimmering abundance, Mick, now unrecognizable in a velours bournoose, his gametophores erect and softly singing, found himself standing before Al Pacino, as if Al had been waiting for him all that time, eagerly waiting in that ambient intemperance, head to foot in the living velours, waiting to whisper in Mick's very own hearing hole, "What's up?" And this within the green light, the silver shadows, the two of them invisible, an instant away from an embrace, the emerald mnemonic froth of admissibility, pureless and benevolent, unfolding them in an ocean of tenderness, punctuated by the sound of lovemaking as lovers from across the galaxies embraced in their myriad conformations subverted and upended by ubiquitous moss topcoats, cunning velours, bomber jackets, and so on, so that the bearded mollusks of Wazat, having just arrived from the distant galaxy whose name was impossible to know, their language spoken in a frequency so low, it generated infinitesimal hypergravity pinholes so powerful, they swallowed up the syllables by capillary attraction the moment they were uttered, without hesitation, simultaneously solemnized the spindled tortoises and shelled philosophical walruses of Wiz, a planet known for its intemperate heterotropic lobsters, and there were pilgrims no bigger than bioplasts. Come to think of it, maybe they were bioplasts, some initially too large to think of returning into Trafik's spumous verdure without causing havoc, and so had particulated into micro bodies, each one at once cumuliformed, cancellated, and fleeced. I never expected to read that aloud, ever.
Well, thank you for doing it. It's an exhilarating ride, and a sort of well, it's what I mean about the book is so it seems to defy space and time in that way, in that quantum physics way. That is so full, and yet it takes this much space on the page. I think I've told you before that when I was a kid, I was fascinated how a microscope made small things big and a telescope made big things small. And there's something of that in here. I feel like somehow this has made something giant fit in here. But it's through your alchemy, really. And it's glorious. Thank you.
Wow, thank you.
I want to get to surrealism. Actually, that was certainly a good stepping off point for that. And I want to remind everyone, or for some it may be new, but many people will know that you are an accomplished visual artist as well as a writer. And in fact, can I show people the cover to this wonderful new book on surrealist women's writing? But this is a cover by you, one of your artworks, that is so exemplary of what it is you do. I think in all the forms that you work with, this sort of constellation of reality, seeing reality differently. So it also made me think this book was a great reminder of how many surrealists did work in those multiple forms, and I'm thinking of you in a sort of list with Dorothea Tanning or Leonora Carrington, Una Kazern, creators for whom both the visual and the written word were equally important. So I wonder if you'll speak to how those things come together for you.
I think I was extraordinarily fortunate because I think every human child comes into the world with all these capacities. We come into the world prepared to be deeply creative and imaginative beings. And we're, alas, in a culture that is not all that interested in the creative imagination. And in fact, I think often threatened by it. I mean, for example, when I was going to college, I met a really interesting person who was a poet who had been kicked out of his family because he was not majoring in something more practical. He was majoring in poetry. His passion was poetry, and he wasn't going into business. And I realized when I became a teacher, that was not uncommon for people to have been deprived in that way as children, or to, as young adults, be made to feel that it was irresponsible and narcissistic of them to want to go into the arts in any way. But I was brought up by parents who were very generous in that way, and also the extraordinary experience of growing up in college campus. I wish everybody could have the experience of growing up in a place where there are lecture halls and theaters and a marvelous library and music all the time, out on the grass, and the creative life just humming and buzzing all the time around. And so I didn't know I was going to be a writer, and I didn't expect that at all. But I think I'd always been certainly interested in reading. I was a passionate reader as a little kid, and reading was so essential to my life and world. And had a father in particular who was wonderful about sharing books with me and who read to me. And when I was too old to, or so he thought, to hear his stories, then began giving me books to read. And in an environment where, people were creating all the time. My mother was also very interested in painting, though she didn't really ever take it anywhere. But I've told this story just recently elsewhere, and maybe I'll tell it again because it was so profoundly important to me. And that was when I was 8 years old, we moved to the campus. Before that, we were living off campus. And we moved to faculty circle. So I was a faculty brat on faculty circle. The other faculty brats, which a little tribe of kids who had the run of the campus during field period or during the summer, which is kind of wonderful. But we were 2 minutes from the library. And so very soon after we moved, my father took me to the library. And it was a wonderful edifice. It looked like a Greek, it was based on ancient Greek architecture. It was really charming. That he said, go to the second story stacks because that's where the fiction is and you'll find something, I'm sure, So there was this wonderful little circular staircase that went up to the second story stacks. And when I got to the top, there was a glass bridge, a bridge of green glass. It's like a fairy tale. And it was scary. I had to, get out on this glass bridge to get to the second story stacks. And walking across it, and it was maybe 6 feet long or 8 feet long. Looking down, I could see the first floor, and it looked like it was underwater. It had become an aquarium. And so I crossed the bridge and immediately saw this beautiful blue binding, and it was robin's egg blue. And I had a special talismanic robin's egg I'd found as a really little kid of 5 that had meant a lot to me. And it was the same blue. It was that magical robin's egg blue. So I took it down, and it was Misfortunes of the Immortals, written by Paul Eluard, the Surrealist poet, and illustrated by Max Ernst and Ernst's collages. And bam, that was a major moment in my life. So that when Surrealism, which was very much fashionable at the time, but often not in the best ways, Salvador Dali, Avida Dollars, Breton called him before he kicked him out of the group, was very, very popular. And it was a word that I knew early on, but it began over time to fall into place. But that was the portal, that book, Misfortunes of the Immortals. And so then later on, I was interested in Dali, and I read his wonderful book, 100 Secrets of Magic Craftsmanship. Great book on painting, actually extremely useful one. So that when I was studying painting, I was really interested in making my own paints at one time, and also because of because of Ernst, and at that point when I was becoming a serious painter, all my interest in surrealism and these other people, and feeling I'd found my tribe, that I was working in very imaginative ways. And it wasn't until much later that I began to write, but I never thought of, I didn't really think of myself as a writer so much as a painter who sometimes wrote poetry. Even though I was beginning to have a number of collections of poetry, I always thought, yeah, it was a sort of dreamy thing that I did on the side. But I came to the novel via dream, and that was a truly, I think, surrealist way of going about it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thrown out of bed by a dream, and then I became a novelist.
Yes. Yeah, I've sometimes, when people ask me if they haven't read you, what your work is like, I say it's like watching someone dream, but they're plugged into a dictionary, you know, and it's just, it's incredible. Surrealism, you know, one of the interesting things, and a book like this, by the way, our audience has been helping each other in the chat track down the title and the location of this book. So it's kind of one of the great virtues of our virtual environment. A book like this is such a testament to the ongoing presence of surrealism in cultural life. How do you see that? Because you have been not only affected in the ways you just spoke about, but you've been active in various surrealist communities, and have certainly seen its fortunes ride the waves over these years, and in different countries. How do you see its continuing presence?
It's so interesting because there was this idea here that was incorrect but very popular, that surrealism had died with André Breton, but in fact that wasn't true at all. It continued, and it continued globally, which is interesting as well. That the ideas of surrealism really continued to matter, and not only the creative ideas, you know, that you pay real attention to dreams and to synchronicity, you know, and to chance, and novelty, and a deep freedom, and then their deep connection to all the ideas of all kinds, but a kind of fearless eroticism, but always informed also by a deep, I think, moral vision of the universe. So surrealism was always very much involved in political positions, you know, far left to anti-fascist, and very active world over, you know, in different places. Always a kind of highly imagined, responsible counterculture. And that has been appealing to one generation after another. Also deeply interested in ecology, way, way, way back.
Mhm.
Always international, you know. It formed in part because of what the colonial abuses were doing to cultures, you know, stealing arts, sacred arts, and bringing them back into museums, and people like Max Ernst and Breton and so on discovering these extraordinary things, and aware not only of the vibrancy and the beauty and the importance of this work, but also aware of the political, you know, the real ethical issues here, and the immense tragedies that were allowing for them to see this work. And they were, in that way, I think, way ahead of their time, you know, recognizing the importance of this work, the importance of taking it seriously, of studying it, you know, but at the same time, very much aware of the drama that was playing out, that was destroying so much of the world's cultures and ecologies. So and I think that's also why the surrealism is so alive. But I also have to say that there are aspects to surrealism that have always been somewhat churchy, as is true with any kind of group.
Sure.
And that became very clear to me, especially in Paris, that there were individuals and certain ways of being that I found really aggravating and not surrealist actually at all, And so I've always found myself somewhat in the, I'm hearing something strange. It sounds like water. Am I making that noise? Sort of bubbling sound?
Oh, hopefully it's just a temporary thing in the feed. You sound great on our end. Yeah.
I'm hearing, so I apologize if I'm doing that. Anyway, so I've always been a bit in what the French call les alentours, the sort of the suburbs of surrealism. And interestingly, the surrealists have always mattered to me the most, have always also been in the suburbs. And I'm thinking of and I'm just suddenly having a complete, Max Ernst and Gaston Bachelard, the philosopher of literature.
Mm-hmm.
Always very important to the group and very close to it, but always in the alentour. And Ernst for the same reasons. There was something doctrinaire about André Breton, which is well known, which he didn't like, but he loved so much of surrealism. He was very active. I think Cortázar is also always in the alentour. And who else? Who is the wonderful guy who collected Roger Caillois?
Yeah.
And Caillois, I remember there's a story that says so much. And I stand with, I understand Breton's position, but I'm with Caillois on this. And that is, somebody gave André Breton a Mexican jumping bean. And Caillois said, after watching it jump around for a while, he said, let's examine it. Let's see what's making it jump. And Breton absolutely refused. And he said, I refuse to know what's making it jump. I want it to remain marvelous. And Caillois, they fought about it, and Caillois' position was, well, we've seen it jump and it's marvelous and beautiful, but there's another aspect to mind, and that is understanding how things work, and I absolutely insist that we open this up and find out why it's coming around. And I'm myself such a frustrated person in terms of science. I mean, I really would have loved to have gotten involved deeply, my life somehow deeply engaged with science, probably the biological sciences. It's a really frustrated natural historian. So I feel really close to Caillois' position.
Yes, but there is a glass half full there. Your frustration has erupted in your work, and in certainly your visual work and your writing, and that's it has nurtured that soil. So so if it doesn't come out one way, it will come out another. Is what I think. Before we have to go, I want to sneak in a couple of questions from the audience. And one actually connects to the sort of where science and the moral vision meet. But someone is asking, since you've imagined this character of an AI, that what do you think is more likely to happen, AI as benign or as malignant?
I think it's really risky. I think the malignant possibilities are immense in so many ways. I mean, for one thing, we are so often a malignant species, and I really worry about how AI is going to be used. But I also think that it is possible. It's very frustrating because on the one hand, it could allow us to explore the galaxies. I mean, on the one hand, it could give us an enormous amount of capacity and information and be, extremely useful. But on the other hand, I think, imagine policing, I imagine a lot of possible violence coming out of it. And also, I imagine that we will be of very little interest to it. And there'll be no place for us in our cumbersome bodies. Yeah. And we might find ourselves in real trouble. We may just get in the way. Or it'll take over in ways that are already pretty incomprehensible for many of us.
Yeah. I agree. We need to embrace those cumbersome bodies all the more tightly. And finally, I had shown the cover to that book of critical writing. That cover was your artwork, but someone is asking about the cover of Trafik.
Isn't it beautiful? So Sarah, so Brian Evanson, the wonderful science fiction writer, has a wonderful daughter who designed the cover, and she's a graphic artist and does a lot of cover designs, and does a number for her coffee house. So that was a lovely kind of coincidence. I was really happy that that happened, because I'm very close to Brian. I know Sarah, and I knew her work. So when Coffee House said, this is what we'd like to do, I said, okay, I loved it. I thought it was beautiful. And they were very excited by it. Can I just say hi to Michael Lee? Because I think he's here. And the book is dedicated to Michael, my friend Michael Lee, and my son Jean-Yves, both of them musicians. And Michael, bless his heart, because I write by hand, he managed to decipher that, and he typed it for me. I'm so grateful, and it was so much fun, because I got to have him here captive for, I don't know how long it took. How long did it take, Michael? 2 weeks or something? So
that sounds like a win-win. Well, Rikki, thank you so much. It has been a joy to speak with you. To all our friends out there, Trafik, you can hit the link if you don't already have it, and get yourself a copy. It is a treat. Thank you, Rikki, and thanks to everyone out there. Good night.
Good night. Thank you for coming.